Good evening, everyone. Monica here from Booklyn Inc., and I'll be your host tonight for this 16th episode of my favorite book, which is original program of Booklyn Inc. We're about to hear from Danielle McCoy, who is talking to us from Portland, Oregon, which is right now 112 degrees. So it's really gotten me feeling grateful that it's only 86 here in Brooklyn. But anyhow, we're going to hear from Danielle McCoy. She's going to present her favorite book that she's ever made. Before we get started, as usual, I always want to acknowledge that the land from which we're broadcasting is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. Please join us in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Booklyn Inc. Is a nonprofit located in Brooklyn, New York. We are celebrating 22 years of promoting artist books and art as primary research and tools for social justice. We distribute work by artists and organizations within the academic market. We host workshops and exhibitions, and we publish books in archival box sets. We're super, super excited to be doing our first serialized online program called My Favorite Book. This is a program where we ask 18 different artists to quickly tell us about the favorite book that they've ever made. Every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday throughout the entire month of June, we have a new episode for you every night from 7 to 7:30. You can check our website for a full schedule, or you can drop in any night on YouTube Live. For more information, you can check out some of these links. Booklyn.org is our website. @BookandArt is how you can find us on Instagram or any social media platform that we use. And at Linktree/Booklyn, you can find lots of fun links. One of them I want to point out is our newly designed and re-edited education manual. It's 100% free. It's 100% awesome. I highly recommend it. Lastly, I want to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for supporting my favorite book. Thank you. Okay, so here we are. Tonight, we are delighted to introduce Danielle McCoy, who's going to present the book Distance from Home. After I read a brief bio, I'll hand it over to Danielle. She'll talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll do a brief Q&A. You can type questions into the chat on YouTube, and I'll moderate as many questions as we have time for. Danielle McCoy is an Antiguan-born multidisciplinary designer and artist currently based in Portland, Oregon. In the realm of graphic design, she predominantly focuses on brand and visual identity, editorial design, and art direction for commercial and cultural clients across various mediums. She believes that design should ultimately serve people by facilitating their lives, both in function and aesthetic. In her practice, Danielle is especially interested in examining the routine's role as a foundational constituent of behavior, language, identity, and institutions. It is through that lens she explores race, gender, and culture. Danielle, welcome to My Favorite Book.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me. And today I'm going to be talking about my favorite book. It's called Distance from Home, and this is what it looks like. Hopefully I have to kind of like acclimatize myself to the camera, but hopefully you can see it well. And it's my favorite book because this is the first artist book I ever made. And it was created at a pretty challenging time in my life while I was at university. But in retrospect, it's been very cathartic for me. It was cathartic for me at the moment when I made it. And it is kind of serving as a time capsule now, showing me how much I've grown. And so I'm going to open it for you all. And it is essentially in the form of a letter. And I have some notes here that I'm reading off screen. But it takes the form of a letter, and it chronicles my experiencing kind of the beginning of my journey and finding out that I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and what it was like to communicate that to family back at home. And so I use correspondence. I've taken correspondence during that period and kind of juxtaposed it with the things that I was actually feeling at the given point in time. And I called it Distance from Home because obviously I was away from home at the time. but also through the process of communicating my diagnosis of OCD with my family, I recognized that distance was not only physical, but also emotional and mental. And so the book, again, like I've shown, takes the form of a letter or, a standard package, which was not unfamiliar as far as what I would receive from family members while I was away at school. And once you open it, it reads confidential, and it is an accordion fold that opens up. And as you can see, it is pretty long, but for me, the structure of the accordion fold really lent itself well to what I wanted to convey, because wrapped up in the confines of this packaging, you can't really tell what lies beneath, and that felt very akin to what I was feeling at the time. Materials-wise, I used Reeves Heavyweight white along with acetate. I screen printed, just a variety kind of mixed media. And I did that because it helped to illustrate the various forms of correspondence I was getting. And so the book opens up here with a letter actually that came from my grandmother, wishing me well when I began school. And on the inside, again, I juxtapose what I was feeling on top of the contents of the letter. And then it continues with me kind of detailing text messages between my mom and myself, with me kind of just speaking to the fact that I was feeling depressed and I was really struggling. And to give a little bit more background, my family is a very God-fearing family of faith. And in the culture that I grew up in, the notion of mental health and anxiety disorders was just not something that was known or familiar territory for me. So it was very difficult speaking to just the experience of discovering this diagnosis with my family at home. And though they meant well, there were things that were said and done that were really challenging for me to hear from them at the time. And so hopefully, again, you can see this well enough. It goes through the process again of all the correspondence. I also have a little snippet of an email I sent for the first time to the school counselor, indicating that, I was struggling and I needed to speak to somebody. And again, I use acetate to kind of, and this kind of flap to kind of just communicate the back and forth correspondence between myself and, in this instance, the school counselor. And then again, more letters juxtaposed or overlaid with a pretty recurring impulsive thought that I was having in the midst of this process and school. And I think the contradiction or the tension here is interesting between, again, the letters and messages from my family at home. This also was happening during the year of my 21st birthday. So I included that here. And then, again, notes from my family on top of or corresponding with, the texts that are more somber and more hinting to what it is that I was feeling beneath the surface. And so it continues. Again, a very kind of long book. I'm sorry, I can't hold it up because my arms aren't long enough. But again, the book is pretty repetitive in the sense that, these themes of, I guess, like I said, tension, things are examining what's really beneath the surface. And in this particular instance, I feature a letter from my aunt and call out something that she said, which in the moment, I don't think she actually realized what the weight of kind of saying this, carry yourself, God bless you, meant for me at the time. And then at the end, I kind of end the book on my first prescription that I ever got to treat my OCD. And I ended it here because at the time it felt like a resolve or resolution during the course of again, discovering the diagnosis, my diagnosis. And that again, that's how it ends. I think a whole nother book can be made about the effects that the medication had on me. But at the time, again, I felt like it was a good kind of resolution to finding out that I had OCD and getting to the point where I did have some clarity on what the potential solutions could be to help me. And so that's the book. I hope you had a good idea. You could get a good idea of the contents of it and the structure and the form. Please ask me any questions. And I think, again, it's still cathartic for me to speak about this. It's somber in subject matter, but personally, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's really helped me to measure my growth personally and also as an artist. So that's Distance from Home.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I have loads of questions, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading some passages from the book. And in particular, you noted that there were some things that I feel like I'm prying here, I have to admit, like asking you to read it is like to the extent that you want to read it, but of course you've made a book, but really, like, to the extent that you want to read parts of it, I'm curious what those things were that your family said that were difficult for you. And I am interested in how the writing about how you were feeling at the time was layered on top of the things that were being communicated from your family. So what were those two kind of, I don't know if it was dissonance, but just the tension between the two? I'd love to like hear what that is.
Yeah, sure. So I can read a few of the text messages, and I kind of low-key hope my mom isn't watching because this has been a challenging book to discuss with her. And this was made in 2014, I believe. So yeah, 7 years after the fact, it's still, a challenging thing to speak about. And so I can read from the beginning. I open with my grandmother's note. It says, "Danielle, may you have a very successful term. God bless, Granny." And on, like juxtaposed or overlaid on top of the note is a quotation from me based on a recurring thought, which is, why is the depression always here? And I think in this instance, I can speak to kind of the contradiction or the dissonance where my family was at home, I was away, first time kind of like really leaving home for an extended period of time. And I think, when your family sends you away, at least when my family did, I think, they caution you of the challenges, but you can never really fully understand what you're going to face, especially being alone, what you might have to confront. And so I believe that though the challenges were considered by my family, they didn't anticipate that I would have come back or discovered that I had an anxiety disorder. And so this kind of like implying of good health, good fortune, paired with my really kind of tumultuous feelings and thoughts creates this tension or dissonance that I was feeling. Thank you for the word, Monica. Dissonance is the word, is a very apt word. But that tension and that dissonance was what I was feeling. And it certainly cultivated a bit of guilt for me, because I felt like I was supposed to be doing better and handling things better, because I knew my family expected that I would do well and that I would succeed. And so that was, I think that, again, tension really, like in how I've represented it in the book, really spoke to what I was feeling internally. And so I have a few text messages here, and it's funny how much things have changed, because at the time I had a BlackBerry, and so the kind of like user interface, which I guess is not dissimilar to text bubbles now, but it was kind of mimicking my BlackBerry UI at the time. And so I said, Mommy, I don't know. I just can't seem to shake these feelings. I think I might need to make a counselor's appointment. And please don't tell Granny. And then on the inside is my mom's response. And it reads, a counselor, if you feel that is what you need to do, then do it, I guess. Remember to say your prayers. And again, the difficulty, I think, in talking about this is that I don't want to indict my parents and my family for doing the best that they could at the time. And I've also, in retrospect, recognized that, you know, my family, my parents, my grandparents didn't have access to the same tools that I do now in the vein of therapy. And so for me, I struggled to hear, say your prayers, are you going to church? Because it felt dismissive. It didn't feel like a practical solution to help me cope with what it was I was feeling. And so they're not any overtly kind of like mean or malicious messages coming from my family or any means. It's more kind of subtle and what I perceived at the time as dismissive. And so that's probably kind of, you know, as small as that communication seems at the time. Like I said, I took it as being very dismissive from my mother, and she doesn't know, and I don't think she still knows. But again, I know she meant her best, but at the time it was just really challenging for me to hear the kind of encouragement to go to my faith, to pray, to go to church as a, you know, carte blanche solution for what I felt at the time was more immediate and required more kind of like pragmatic answers. Yeah, that's maybe the one I feel most comfortable reading. I know that the kind of like the thing about putting things into a book is that you make them accessible for people to read. And this is actually the first time I'm speaking about this book publicly. And I maybe also underestimated, you know, kind of unearthing the feelings that I experienced during this process again. But again, for me, it's helped because it's also, like I mentioned, showing me the growth that I've had since finding out the initial diagnosis. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Monica.
Yeah, that does. Thank you so much. Sorry for the noise, but here we are. No, you bring up an interesting point that I think I sort of laid out, like the difference between like comfort level and sharing, and but that you made a book, and you know, you made a book, but it's like you didn't share it with everyone, and you made it in an edition size for a reason. You know, I mean, this thinking for me at least comes from zine culture, and that, you know, you make zines and you don't digitize them because you want to distribute them within a specific community. You want to share them, but you don't want to broadcast them and replicate them, you know, with infinity. And even within special collections, like there are some books that you can't photograph. And even further, at like an archive like the Lesbian Herstory Archives, there's a certain part of their collection that's only visible to people within the LGBT community or lesbian identified. So it literally is not for the eyes of certain people. And that's like, that's kind of, you know, that just because someone makes a book doesn't mean it's, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I also think artist books of this nature are very like personal. So there's this duality there too, where it's like, yes, I've put a very personal experience into a book. And I mean, for me, I was really interested in this book in just expressing what I felt was pent up and that I didn't know how else to express. And this book is so important to me because it helped to inform how I was going to use artist books as a medium. I'm a designer by trade first, or at least that's my day job. And so much of that is consumer facing, client facing, and for everybody's consumption. I think I've made a conscious decision with my bookmaking that I was going to use it as a medium to serve me and to kind of exercise my issues and to express my opinions, whether they made people uncomfortable, whether they made me uncomfortable. But again, as a way to kind of make sense of things. And so even though it's in a book and it's kind of in a way immortalized in ink and on paper, and there's this great poem by Czechslaw Miloš that I love. It's super short and it's called "And Yet the Books." And it talks about how books are going to outlive us. And I believe that, you know. But at the same time, it's a really personal experience to read a book or to go through a book. You know, even the challenge of showing it off on camera, I think, proves that, right? Where a book is usually a really like singular experience. And I think that is something that I consider whenever I make a book. And it certainly was something that I thought about in making a book like this. So I was okay with sharing what I experienced at the time or what I was experiencing, knowing that only one person could potentially, you know, interact and read this at the time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the artist book as a you know, yeah, you know, zines I think function a little bit differently, but that's how I approach bookmaking.
Interesting. I'll take this moment just to remind anybody who's watching that if you have questions or comments for Danielle, you can put them in the YouTube chat and we'll get them to her. I had sort of a comment thought question. I was thinking about the narrative device of correspondence and how you use it, and knowing that there's, you know, a history of that, of using that as a narrative device, and a lot of, I'm sure there's like whole classes you could take on that, which I could never speak to right now, but I've used that device and in my own storytelling, I think in moments where the lived experience in retrospect maybe wasn't far enough past and wasn't particularly enjoyable in the nuance of the experience. And so that's where I've found myself using text messages, correspondence, to kind of chart a narrative that was sort of compartmentalized, but was truthful and was like kind of raw. I don't know if there's something you can talk to about that. Like, was that a choice to use it? Did that just feel like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, everything you said. At the time of making this book, I was going through this. And there are many times where during the process, I thought, why am I doing this? This is still too raw. I don't even have full formulated, thoughts or words on what this diagnosis is making me feel. I did not reconcile with the diagnosis at that point, far from. Again, because this OCD was, I watched Monk, and that was the representation of OCD that I had. And I had to learn that it manifests very differently for different people. It's even less studied as it occurs in Black women. And so I felt like I needed to, as even though I was experiencing difficulty reconciling with kind of finding this out, I needed to get it out. And the primary kind of like data of texts and letters felt like the only way that I could kind of like really truthfully communicate what it was that I was feeling and what or how my family members closest to me received the information. It just felt more honest using their words, because I knew that if done the wrong way, this could also paint them out to be not good family. So I was cautious of that, and I guess you could say my therapist could say a lot about me putting the feelings of others, my family, before my own in an instance like this. But I knew, again, like I've expressed, that they just were not equipped, and I wasn't, to have discourse or discussion about something like this, because it's just was kind of like an unfamiliar foreign territory. And so everything you said about the use of letters as like a kind of primary device for speaking to, an experience that is happening or is not particularly enjoyable are the reasons why I used the letter form as a device here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so hard, I think, in telling your own story, because our stories are so intertwined. And so often the things that are said to us can't be said any other way. And so to transmit them feels a little like, I don't know if betrayal is an overstatement, but like, how do you, find your own truth and communicate it to the measure that feels like you've processed through the medium, and not indict other people as characters or outposts or in your own truth telling and your story, especially when they're the people you love the most and to whom you owe your entire life.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's very complicated. And I think that part that maybe it's resonating with me is one of the reasons that I do like your work so much, and why I reached out to you for another book that I had seen, and for very different reasons. So I'm so happy and feel grateful that you've shared another book with me that is like, wow, this is really amazing. And I do have other questions, but I feel like I'm sort of toggling a lot of things right now. And I also just want to give a lot of space to process, for everyone who's listening, to process what you've said, because I do recognize it as so incredibly valuable. There's a bravery in that I think is really something to care for. So I'm glad that you found a space where you can care for that. So let me ask you some kind of, I guess, structural questions. Like, if somebody, is watching this and is like, I'd love to see photographs of this book. I'd love to see more documentation beyond the limits of like what we can do on YouTube. Where might they find that? Could you also say, what edition this was made in? And yeah, that's good for right now.
So the book was an edition. It is an edition of 3. And I have to give credit to my professor at SCAD, Cynthia Lawless, for really kind of like impressing upon me and like my other classmates that we should aim for an edition of 3, which I use as my rule of thumb. Because it is certainly a challenge to hand produce an edition, multiple editions of anything. But it's allowed me to, share and my work kind of like much more further than it would have gone had it just been an edition of one.
Yeah.
And then as far as like documentation of this book, and where you can find it, it doesn't exist online. Sorry to say. And I think, for a time it was, because it was on displayed at SCAD briefly, shortly after I made it. But I recognize also that I wasn't ready. I think I maybe prematurely allowed it to be on display at a time when I wasn't ready for that. And so at the moment, there are no documentation or pictures online. But it's something that I hope to share on my personal site in the near future, as I kind of display a little bit more robustly my artist books. So it will eventually be on my website, but at the moment it is not there.
Well, it's definitely a perfect time then to share your website with everyone and how you can be in touch with Danielle. On Instagram, you can find her at Unlearn Limits and DanielleMcCoy.xyz. Lots of fun things. I was digging through that earlier today. And that makes it so much more special, I feel, that you're sharing this book with us and that this is the documentation of the book. And this is what we can experience of the book now. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see, I'm going to do some closing, and then I'm just going to ask you if you have any closing thoughts to finish up. So all I have to tell everyone watching is this is the final week of my favorite book. And so that means we have 2 remaining episodes tomorrow and the following day, Tuesday, Wednesday at 7 o'clock. We have Sophia Samozzi and Leopoldo Bloom, who interestingly is another artist who told his story about his gender transition through postcards to his mother. So maybe stick around afterwards, Danielle, and I'll send you a link to that. There's like a kinship that I'm seeing between the two of you. So that's it. And if you like the programming that you're seeing, please remember to subscribe to our channel. And now I'll just ask Danielle if she has any closing thoughts to leave people with.
I just want to say thank you to you, Monica. Thank you to Brooklyn for making the space for me to share today. Again, this was a big kind of moment for me in like really speaking to this book publicly, as I've not done it before ever. So thank you for just, like I said, cultivating the space for this to happen. I really appreciate it. And long live books. That's all.
Long live books. Well said. Thank you so much, Danielle. Good night, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. for the next episode.